those, but first we're gonna experiment with some graphite and water. And the experiment part is every manufacturer uses a different binder in their pencils. Some are more water soluble than others. Some are pretty much unsoluble with water. I think most of the ones that you'll run across will dissolve to some extent. So hopefully you've got some kind of razor blade, X-Acto knife, or knife of some sort. Because what we're going to do, and I'll show you why you need the X-Acto knife. So this is just a number 2 school pencil. It's the Ticonderogas that I like. And you want to just kind of scrape some of that off onto a piece of paper. Make a little pile of it. And we're going to do that. And then we'll do another one next to it. We just take that same pencil and we just do some shading with that. And I'll show you why you kind of want the powdered version over the drawn version there. So I'm going to take a brush here, and it doesn't have to be real wet, it just has to be kind of wet. So this is the powdered version here, and you can see that right away it kind of dissolves a little bit. Alright, so that's dissolved pretty well, and you can see that it kind of makes a wash. And you can see it leaves some edges here and there, and that's just because it doesn't dissolve quite completely, but it makes a fairly decent gray wash. Morning, Barb.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
It's okay. Now if we try to do that same thing with the one that we scribbled the gray down on, it doesn't do a whole lot. You can see it doesn't want to pick it up too much. That's because it gets embedded into the paper even though we're shading lightly. Okay.
Okay.
So that's just the number 2 Ticonderoga. Doesn't really. And then let's do. This is a 2B. This is the Prismacolor Turquoise. It doesn't matter which pencils you have. These are just the ones I had sitting around here. So we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna scrape some off. Make a little pile here. What I'm doing here is I'm just showing you that different brands kind of act a little bit differently. Because you don't necessarily have, they do make water-soluble graphite pencils and water-soluble graphite. It's just you're assured that the binder is going to dissolve with water in that case. So, but this we're just kind of seeing what the pencils that we do have are capable of. So this is that 2B Prismacolor Turquoise pencil. And it works kind of the same way. And you can see, even though this is a 2B and this is an HB, they're fairly close in value once they're dissolved. Okay. And again, that kind of comes down to the binder. So this one does the same thing. Once we scribble it down, it really doesn't do too much. So this was the 2B Prisma. We're going to use. This is a Faber-Castell. This is a 6B. And so these so far have worked pretty well. Now again, if you get the ones that are designed to be water soluble, they'll probably be a little bit more dramatic result, but these work just fine. And you might notice if you're using different brands of pencils, you might see there's more granulation where the little particles of graphite stay suspended in the water longer and it's kind of separate out. You might see a little bit of the granulation in there, and that can actually be a really cool effect. So if you like, let's say you're working on something and you want kind of a stony texture to it, that might be an easy way to get that look. Especially if you find one that when it granulates, it granulates in big clumps. So this one hardly does anything after you draw it. You know, if you draw with it and brush over, it really doesn't want to pick up at all. So that was the 5B Faber and Castell. Okay. So this is the one that I would think would do the most. It's an Ebony Pencil by design. It's also it's a Faber pencil also, but you're gonna notice that this one doesn't do a whole lot. And again, it kind of shows that the binder is different. So we'll scrape some of that off. It doesn't work anywhere near like you think it would, because it's a very dark pencil. And you would think that would mean the graphite was softer, and it probably does, but the binder's different. So this one, right away I can see that it wants to stay very granulated. And I can see those particles floating in my wash. So that might be one to play around with a stone texture, because you can kind of dot that in there and get, you know, control where that kind of goes. And I'll hold that up closer to the camera so you can see it there. So, and the same thing, we'll do the scribble test here. And so, not much happened at all there. I can barely see anything coming off of that. And that might actually just be because my brush had a little bit of residue in it. So, this is Ebony. Okay, so you can see, let me refocus that. So you can see how the Ebony Pencil really granulated. Those particles didn't want to really dissolve into the water. So that'd be a good one to use like for stone textures and stuff like that. And the other ones did pretty well. And the neat thing with this is you can kind of layer these up. So you could do this, let it dry a little bit and come back and do it again and get it a little bit darker still. You can treat this pretty much like you would any kind of liquid paint medium. And one of the things we'll be doing today, let's see, which one do I want to use here? Maybe I'll use the Prisma. So what you can do is I'll scrape some more of this off. And you'll probably find that if you're going to do this for any real length of time in your drawings, you'll probably want to trim back some of that wood on the pencil, because it'll be easier to get that graphite off of there. So we're going to take that. I've got a little flat brush here. It's kind of stiff. And I'm going to pick up some of that. And I keep sliding down on the camera here. So I've got my brush kind of loaded up with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to spatter with that. And we'll be doing this in our drawing later. And you can see that makes a ready spatter there. It works pretty well. You can get different sized dots with it. So you can spatter with it. You can draw with with it. We can do some grasses or something. Pretty much anything you can do with, say, a watercolor kind of technique, you can do with this. You can do some dry brushing with, the bristles of the brush kind of spread out and get some hatching and cross-hatching lines going there. So I get a little bit closer with that. Let it focus there. So you can see the spatters, you can see just the kind of the painting, and this is, I've really let the brush kind of dry out here, and it's starting to separate, so I can do some hatching and cross-hatching with the separated bristles there, build up textures and patterns that way. And kind of the neat thing with all of this is it's still erasable, so if I come up here to one of these that's dried, I can still erase that away. Wow. Because it doesn't actually penetrate into the paper. Yes. So like down here, right at these real quick grasses, if I wanted some of those to drop kind of into the background, I could just kind of lightly erase over top of those, and then I'm getting another value range out of those.
Cool.
So it's kind of a neat technique. It's a very forgiving technique. If you put something down that you're not crazy about, you can erase it for the most part. Alright, so we'll take that idea and we're going to work on our cookies here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold a sheet of paper here in half. And this is going to act as my palette. So whichever pencil you decide to go with, I'm going to shave a little bit of the wood off of this just so it's easier to... Alright, so here we go. We need our reference picture. And we want to do these, you know, fairly big. We don't want to do them gigantic, but we want to do them fairly large here. And we're just going to start off by breaking this down into its basic shapes like we normally would. I'll tell you now from sketching this out before, you might want to start kind of with the raspberries a little bit. At least make sure they're the right size before you get too far into this. Especially the one on the bottom. This one here on the top you can change pretty easily, but the one there on the bottom, because it touches two cookies, if you're worried about accuracy, that one's gonna bug you because you'll probably have one of the cookies slightly too big or too small, and then when you go to put that raspberry in there, it will not fit quite right. But if you're not too worried about the accuracy of where that raspberry lands, then you know, don't have too much to worry about with it. So I'm just basically roughing in some shapes. And you want to kind of look to see where things line up. You know, does the tip of this leaf line up kind of with inside the macaroon or outside? I think it's a little bit inside. And those kinds of things will kind of help you judge proportions a little bit. This comes out here and comes down. And I might be making mine a little bit too big. We'll see. It might be kind of tight here at the bottom. And our tendency is going to want to be to draw these cookies all nice and lined up and neat, and they're not. They're kind of mushed here and there a little bit, you know, off to one side or the other. Or, they're not exactly the same top to bottom. So here I'm going to use a little bit of negative space. We talked about negative space in the last class, and if you've had another drawing class with me, you've probably heard me refer to that. So I'm using this shape of this cookie back here to find the edge of this cookie. So I'm looking more at this shape than this one, and that will kind of help me get started on this one. Once you get it sketched out, you have something that kind of looks like this. To me, these always look like little hamburgers until...
I was just going to say that. They look like hamburgers.
They do, don't they?
Yeah, because I've got the black and white, and I thought, are these cheeseburgers?
Yeah.
Or Egg McMuffins?
Yep. They kind of look like that. So when you go...
Raspberries made me wonder about that.
Yeah. So when you go to do the raspberries, there's actually a little bit of a pattern to these. So the little pieces of the raspberry kind of travel across in rows. So they kind of go like this one down here at the bottom does something kind of like this. And then the next set is staggered from that. So they create little triangular spaces in between. Okay, I don't know if you can see that, but and they're not all nice and neatly formed. Some of them are kind of mushed and that, but if you kind of start off with them like that, you can make some lumpier or bigger or more smushed. So when we start to add our washes to this, we want to remember we don't want to use a ton of water because we are using drawing paper, and most drawing paper doesn't like getting wet a whole lot. You could use like a, if you had some, you could use like a hot press watercolor paper. Bristol would probably take it pretty well depending on the brand. I would still test it. I wouldn't spend a lot of time on a drawing and then just kind of randomly throw some water on it. Well, actually I probably would, but because I don't think ahead like that on those kinds of things. I just decide, hey, I'm going to try that, and then I find out that it's the wrong paper to do that with. But then I know. Until the next time I do it. All right. So, and we're just really kind of roughing this in. Don't get in there and start really getting carried away with the drawing yet. We want to take advantage of those washes and be able to block stuff in a little bit with those. And if you happen to be using the water soluble pencils,
Yeah.
just be real careful on how much shading you do, because I would imagine what's going to happen is you're going to hit that with water and it's just going to kind of melt.
Okay.
So you're going to want to be a little bit more careful with those. So that's kind of what we want. We just kind of want to have a basic sketch out of our macaroons. And we're going to, any editing we need to do, we want to do that now. We want to, if there's stuff we want to erase out, any of our guidelines or finding lines, we want to take some of those out now. Clean some things up. And so we're going to take our brush, and we're just going to mix up a little bit here, and we don't want it super dark.
Okay, so what color are we mixing up?
We're just mixing up, this is my 2B. I'll just use this throughout. Mine kind of ended up being very similar in value. But you want something that's kind of light. You don't want it to be super dark. And let me see my reference here. So we're going to start, we're just going to start with a light wash. And I'm going to start here behind my raspberry on the top here. And
Shadow behind the raspberry?
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the one under it, and it kind of wraps around this way, and it comes down like this. And we'll be drawing over top of this, so don't worry if it's got some lines in it or if it's kind of edgy. And then we'll take just a little bit of clean water on a damp brush, just kind of wet your brush and then tap it off a little bit if you can. And we'll soften that edge a little bit if you get any hard edges. If you think it needs to be a little bit darker, go in and do a second pass with that, like up through here. This could be darker, and eventually we'll bring that up into the raspberry. But we're just going to work on the cookies for now. I work my way around here, and underneath this one here.
Let's see, just fill in on wherever we see the shadows, huh?
Yeah, just the main shadows, because we'll be doing, like I said, we're going to be doing drawing over top of this. We're just trying to use this to establish some of the softer edges and things like that. It actually speeds up the drawing process a little bit too, because you can block this in fairly quickly and then come back and draw over top of it. there's a drawing technique I do sometimes that is from stone lithography, and you can from stone lithography.
That's a big word.
It is. It's how they used to do printmaking or printing for like I'm trying to think of the time period it was in, but what they would do is they would draw on big pieces of limestone with grease pencils, and that would create a resist to the acid wash that would etch the stone. But they would make to make grays, they would dissolve the pencils or the grease that they used for the pencils in water, and they called that a tush. Grease would do the same thing. It would dissolve in the water, but it would leave particles behind. It would leave a granulation, and it could be very pronounced. And you can make it more pronounced depending on which pencil you used. But it creates a very unique effect, and I found that you can do a similar process on cold press illustration board, and it looks almost like you drew it on the stone.
Yeah.
And it's a little time consuming because it stays wet a lot longer than this does. But it can create some really unique effects because of that granulation process.
I like watercolor paints like French ultramarine that granulate. I think it produces a really nice look.
Yeah, a lot of Daniel Smith colors tend to granulate. You can actually get, you can buy granulation medium.
Oh.
And you can add that to your water while you paint, and it kind of makes the paints granulate more.
Is that made by Daniel Smith?
Winsor Newton makes it. I know that. I don't know if Daniel Smith has any. And it's really kind of neat stuff. I've actually played around with it with ink, with India ink.
Oh, cool.
And it works. It takes some practice because with the India ink, because it doesn't work quite the way you would expect it to. And I actually found that if I mixed a bunch of different kinds or brands of India ink together, it had a better effect because I got different sized particles in the granulation. This is what happens when you have a illustration professor that tells you to figure out what everything dissolves with, because then you can do more with it. So is more or less blocked in. I've got a couple things I missed here. Let me hit those real quick. But you can see how just being able to kind of wiggle your brush through some areas gives you some really subtle shapes, very soft, subtle shapes that are hard to get with just your pencil. It takes more time and effort to get them with your pencil. So even though this is really pale, it's starting to look like raspberries and macaroons, which is what we want, hopefully. Unless these are supposed to be chocolate chip cookies, and then we're in trouble. So the things I did first should be plenty dry enough to start working back over top of it. And I'm going to go back to my my HB pencil here, and I'm going to start to do more drawing. I'm going to start to really get in here and develop my values. You want to be careful if the paper feels a little bit wet still. If you had a hairdryer handy, you could use a hairdryer on it. It'll probably potato chip a little bit, but that's okay. That's really not going to cause any problems other than a little bump in the road here or there. So I'm starting to develop my values, and I'm working right over top of that base coat that I laid down. And so I'm just going to kind of work my way around here, and I'm going to put a first pass of real values down here, and the raspberries, you're probably going to do a little bit of those on those, and then come back to them a few times to get them to look kind of the way you want them. I think because you very easily get trapped into spending, you know, quite a bit of time on just one raspberry, and it's best to do a little bit on them and then come back to them, because you'll end up getting the raspberry completely, you know, done and looking really nice, and then you'll discover that you don't want to do the rest of your drawing because you got tired. You poured all your energy into that one lone raspberry. I'm going to go a little bit further with this, and then I'll come back and we're going to do some spattering on top of these to get that texture on top of the cookies here. So we want to get some of these established so we have an idea where those things are going to kind of go. And really what I'm doing now is I'm just kind of using my pencil to darken where I need to within those washes and to kind of neaten them up. They get a little bumpy. You know, there's some areas like here where it goes down into that little crinkle that could be a little bit darker. Make it feel like it's turning a little bit more. And you should be able to blend these too. You should be able to take a blending stub and blend over top of these. It should move the graphite that you washed in too. So it's a pretty versatile technique. And you can kind of shade in and out of those to, let's say the shape wasn't quite right to begin with, and you can move in and out of them with your pencil a little bit. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you on this one, because everybody's probably going to be at different stages with this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my flat brush, if I can find it here, my pile of things. And I'm using the flat brush just because it spatters better. My round brush here is a little bit too long for that, and what it'll do is I'll end up with globs instead of like a real spray. So I'm going to go. Yep, toothbrushes are amazing. So I'm going to load my brush up here with just some water and graphite. And I'm going to look at my reference, and I'm going to spatter carefully onto my cookie. And if any of this spatter kind of goes outside of the cookies, it's okay because we can erase it when it's dry. Give it a couple minutes and you can erase it. There's a little up here. And remember, when you're spattering, pull towards you so that it goes away from you. So there's a little bit of spatter on there. I'll see if we can make that out.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So it just adds a soft texture to the top of the cookies.
Yeah.
If you wanted to get really crazy with it, you could really mix up a big wash of it and get a bigger brush and kind of fling it at it. I don't think that would necessarily work with our macaroons, but if you wanted to do that on something else, you could do that. You can pretty much treat it any way that you would any other liquid medium. So this gets really dark right through here, and then it runs into whatever filling is in there. About there. Yeah. You can get just inexpensive muslin and just cut like a 4x4 square and put a couple put a tablespoon or more of the powder in that, and then fold it up, and then just rubber band the top, and do a little test to see how much. You just kind of pounce it. You're making a pounce bag, and that will let the graphite or charcoal out. Now, depending on how porous the muslin is, you may want to put a second piece over top of that. And that's what last time I made them for a class, and that's what we ended up doing. Was I ended up doing a double layer because it came out really fast. But it's a great way to block in big areas. You can pounce it around and smudge it, and has kind of a nice effect. All right, so I'm doing another pass with the wash here, and now this will pick up some of my spatter. It'll loosen some of my spatter and probably blend it in a little bit. So I want to be kind of careful with that. But I like the softness and the texture that I get with the brush here, so I'm going to do a little bit more with that, and then I'll work another layer with the pencil. Use some of this for some of my shading on my raspberry here, just to quickly fill that in. So that shaded that half of the raspberry in quite quickly, so I don't have to fuss with it quite as much. Now if you do another layer of washes, you'll notice that it really doesn't do anything to the parts that you've drawn on, because it's ground into the paper. So you can pretty safely work over top of that without any worries that that's going to move too much. So on the raspberries here, I'm just kind of doing these little half circles of wash to create a shadow edge, and that'll go a lot quicker for me than to try to shade each one of those with my pencil. I'll probably still have to come back and do a little bit of shading on those, but not anywhere near as much as I would otherwise. So let's just give them a little bit more dimension. Do a little of that up here. Okay. So now I'm going to work back and forth between my HB and a 2B pencil here to start to build up some darker values. And I think I'm going to take a blending stub and work some of these in here just a little bit. So the blending stub should not only move what you've drawn on there, but it should also move and blend the washes. So you want to be a little bit careful. And don't forget, if you're going to use the blending stub, don't forget that once it gets a little bit of graphite build-up on it, you can actually draw with it. There's enough graphite left on it, you can get some nice soft shading with it. All right, so are you using the water-soluble pencils?
Yeah.
Okay, so what you can do is just take let me get a brush here. And that was the pencil I was using. So we'll take our brush and we'll get it wet. It doesn't need to be dripping wet. And just take it in, I don't know if you can see that. You're just going to rub the brush over the lead of the pencil.
Okay.
Okay, it may be a little bit wetter than what I had it there. And what that should do is that should dissolve enough of that pencil that you should be able to spatter with it.
Okay.
And again,
Oh, yes, it works very well.
Yeah, those should work. Mine is going to be pretty pale because it's mostly going to be water. because it's really not coming off the pencil real well. But yours are kind of meant to dissolve more readily. So, and then you can just spatter with it.
And
Okay.
I dipped the end of my pencil lead right in the water,
Yeah.
and then brushed the
Yes.
paintbrush over it.
Yeah, that'll work too.
Yep.
Yeah, if you're using regular drawing pencils though, you wanna scrape some off and do it that way. All right. So what I'm doing now is I'm coming in. I'm trying to build up my values. Trying to get a play on the light and darks a little bit more here. This could help too, like if the paper that you're working on doesn't have a lot of tooth to it. The tooth of the paper determines kind of how many layers of value you can build up, because you flatten that tooth out each time you go over it. And by doing the washes over top, you're not damaging the tooth of the paper really, so you have more layers of value you can start to create.
Okay.
So I'm going in, I'm filling in some of the dark areas on the raspberries here, and I'll probably go around again with the brush and do those little half circle shapes on those to get those to look like there's light reflecting on them. So I'm going in with my eraser now, and I'm doing a little bit of drawing with it, kind of looking for some highlights I might have lost along the way. Any place I think is too dark.
I think I often use the wrong hardness of pencil. I just pick up pencils and go to work.
Yeah, you want to be careful of that.
And so hard lines and things like that.
You could color code them. You could use some nail polish and put different colors on the end so that you're a little bit more aware of which one you're picking up. So right now I'm just going around with this is a 5B, but it's just something that's really dark, and I'm starting to work in my darkest values here. And I think I'm going to do one more round of spatter on this, and I want to try to get some bigger spatters out of it this time. So I'm going to shave off some more of my pencil here, just so I have extra. And get my brush. I'm going to do a little test here to see what I get. That's good. And I'm going to be fairly close to it so that it stays more where I want it. I get less flyaway.
What are you doing? Spraying it with water?
No, this is just I'm spattering again. I just wanted some.
Spattering, I
Yeah.
can't see.
I just wanted a little bit darker and maybe a little bit bigger spatters in there. A bit like it's floating. So I'm going to take that same brush and I'm going to mix up a wash, and I'm going to put kind of a line in back here. I can kind of fade it out a little.
I have a goofy question from last week.
Okay.
I found a picture of a stork.
Okay.
And it was in a place where there was some mist, like the early morning.
Okay.
And so I thought, gee, that's cool. I wonder how you do this in pencil.
In pencil?
Yeah, in a drawing.
Well, probably the easiest way to do it would be, let me push this out of the way for a second. So you could shade. I'll do a couple different ways here. So this is my scrap piece here. So I'm just going to kind of shade an area. So you'd have to do the background part first. Alright, and then we want to blend that together. We'll take a blending stub to do that, to try to get the lines out of it. Okay, then I'm going to take my kneaded eraser and I'm going to kind of shape it into kind of an edged wedge here. And I'm just going to start coming in and let me move this down a little bit here. There. So I'm kind of making these little wiggly cloud shapes here. And then what I would do is I would just kind of, again, take my kneaded eraser and I'm just going to tap over those now. And that'll take some of that away from it. So that's kind of that's probably the way I would approach that initially. You could even try what we were doing here and do a wash like this. And when that's dry, it might not be dry enough yet. Oh, that'll work. And do the same kind of thing. But you can control the edges a little bit. You'd want to let that dry because it's pilling the paper as I do this, but same kind of thing. And you could work back into that with your finger and smudge some stuff and get some different values happening in there.
That's supposed to be a cloud then, or a cloud?
Yeah, if you're trying to do like mist or trailing mist or clouds or something like that, any of that could kind of work for that.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I kind of liked the bird.